Hi, I'm Jamie Boss. Welcome to our shop. This video is going to be about getting started with doing inlays on your banjo, guitar, mandolin, whatever you want to inlay. This video will get you going. And the idea is that we're going to use inlays that you can buy on the internet. They're either simple ones like these little maple leaves, or we have something like this star that I got at Stuart McDonald, or even complicated ones like this. Ultimately, if you want to end up doing your headstock or you want to do fancy inlays on your fretboard, again, this video is going to get you started. And the inlaying process by itself is not difficult. It's just a matter of taking one step at a time. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to need is the inlay. There are all types of inlays available online, from complicated designs for fretboards to simple designs for headstocks. Most inlays will come glued to a cardboard back for safe shipping. We'll be using a large sea turtle for our inlay for this headstock and this guitar. I carefully remove each piece from the cardboard and lay it out on the bench. For tools, we'll be using a sharp scribing tool, a brush for removing routing and sanding chips, and a Dremel tool and routing fixture. The fixture must be able to hold the Dremel tool upright and allow the depth of the cut to be adjusted. This is a typical fixture you might buy from a luthier supply house. Dremel also makes its own brand of fixture for routing, which we'll be using in this video. Our sea turtle inlay will need two routing bits. One will be a very fine bit for cutting the outline of the inlay, and the other will be a wider cutting bit to remove material rapidly from within the outline shape. The project will also require a good ruler, a straight edge, to mark the center line on the headstock and to position the inlay correctly. Plain old-fashioned poster paint can be bought in any hobby store. Poster paint is water-soluble and cleans up easily. Any kind of small brush to apply the poster paint will do. We'll be using crazy glue to temporarily attach the inlay so we can scribe around it for a routing guide. After routing out a cavity to fit the inlay in, we're going to attach it with epoxy. To match the color of the wood, an epoxy coloring powder will be used. This will also allow us to fill any gaps around the inlay for a seamless appearance. The epoxy coloring powder comes in black and brown, whether you're working with rosewood or you're working with ebony. Once the inlay is epoxied into its cavity, we'll use a sanding block with 80 grit sandpaper to sand the epoxy and inlay flush with the wood. I use denatured alcohol to clean up the wood and sanding grit after the inlay is leveled. Finally, anytime mother of pearl or another form of shell material is sanded, it's important to wear a good dust mask, as the particles for sanding can be very harmful to your lungs. Never blow off the sanding grit with compressed air. We'll begin by clamping our headstock in a soft-jawed vise and laying out the components of the inlay to make sure they'll fit. Once I confirm the parts will fit where I intend to inlay them, I spread a thin layer of poster paint where the inlay will be installed. I usually wait till the first coat dries to see if you need a second coat for complete coverage. Once the paint's dried and I'm happy with the way it looks, I'll use a scribe and a straight edge to mark the center line of the headstock. With the center line marked, I use a tiny bit of crazy glue to temporarily glue each piece in the correct position on the headstock. Very fine inlays might require the use of a small tweezer. With all the pieces glued in place, and I'm satisfied the inlay is correctly oriented, I use a sharp scribe to mark the outline of the inlay. There's no reason you couldn't use a thin marker pen for this task if you're careful. After marking out the inlay, I use an X-Acto knife to gently pry the pieces away from the headstock, leaving the outline exposed. The routing process begins by selecting a very thin 3/64 downcut routing bit. I use this to cut close to the line that I've scribed. Inserting the bit, I use a straight edge to help me set the cutting depth of the bit. I'll be using a Dremel routing fixture for this inlay. The depth of the cut will be about 1/2 the thickness of the inlay. Next, the Dremel motor is turned on, and I carefully lower the cutting bit onto the headstock. Using slow and accurate movements, I follow the outline of the inlay, trying to stay close as possible to the scribe line. I'll frequently stop and blow away the wood chips if needed. If you make a mistake and go outside of the line, don't let it worry you. We'll be coloring the epoxy to match the surrounding wood, and this should take up most of the gaps. After cutting out the outline, I use a 1/8 inch downcut routing bit to hog out the material within the outline. Again, slow and careful movements are needed to prevent taking more material than is needed. Stopping and blowing away the wood chips will give you a better field of view. I then try each piece one at a time to see if I've removed enough material. If not, I use the Dremel tool to widen the cavity so all of the inlay pieces will fit snugly into place. Fitting the inlay snugly, I can now remove all of the pieces and mix the epoxy. First, the resin and hardener are mixed together. Then I use brown coloring powder to match the rosewood headstock. The powder is mixed into the epoxy and the cavity is filled. As the pieces of the inlay are pushed into place, some of the epoxy will be displaced and be pushed out. I'm careful to leave enough epoxy on the top of the installed inlay to allow for settling and air bubbles. Many people who inlay a lot will heat the epoxy and surrounding area with a hot air dryer to break loose any of the air bubbles. Then I allow the epoxy to harden overnight. As the sanding block is used to sand down the hardened epoxy and inlay, The yellow poster paint will disappear and expose the finished inlay. After brushing off the grit, I use an old rag with alcohol to wipe off the headstock and to see the finished look of the inlay. Remember, always wear a mask.